Is it better to work for a small company, a medium sized company, or a large company? Now, I've worked at all three of them, so today I kind of just want to go over my experience with each of them and the pros and cons I found for each type of company. Now, when I first started my career, I actually started working at a very small company. I think there were only around like 20, 30 employees, so pretty small. And at the time, this is what I thought that I wanted. I thought that it was better to work at a small company because then you're kind of closer and you get to know your coworkers a lot more. But after working at this type of company, I did find a lot of pros and cons to this type of environment. So let's go over the pros first. As I was saying earlier, since it was a smaller company, there were a lot less people, and you did get to know everyone that you worked with pretty well. And it was kind of unique in the sense that in the same office space, you'd have people of all different levels together in the same area. So it was pretty normal to see the owner or the highest up people in the company on a daily basis. And also to be able to talk to them and get to know them more on a personal level. It was also nice at a smaller company to kind of have less formality and rules. At large corporations, there's often a lot of different protocols and rules that you have to follow in a specific way. At a smaller company, it is a lot more relaxed, I find. And there still are procedures, but it's more loose and not as strict as a large company would be. And this kind of made it a lot more of a relaxed environment where there wasn't necessarily that pressure to be perfect or to follow every rule perfectly. On top of that, since it is a small company and you get to know everyone pretty well, for team building events, it's not like you're meeting new people. You know everyone who you're going out with, and you also know who you're working with on a daily basis. It's really easy to know who does what because there's only like one person that does it. Like if you need an accountant or HR, there's usually like one HR person or one finance person. So, in that sense, you can easily kind of know what everyone does and where everyone fits in. So, now let's talk about some of the cons of this type of company. So, like I was saying earlier, there are only a couple people at that location. So, if you do not like somebody, you will be seeing that person every day, most likely, and you really can't avoid them because how small the company is. Another thing is, like I was saying earlier, how the procedures aren't necessarily super strict. So, if you are somebody that likes a lot of structure or appreciates having strict rules, in my experience, it wasn't always like that, and you would have to be flexible sometimes with different things. Another huge problem here is if you're looking for a promotion, it can be very difficult to do that because there's often only one person in the position above you. And if you want that position, you just have to wait for the person to leave in order to even apply for it. So the opportunity isn't really there in that way. Another con, and this one highly depends on your manager or the type of management in the company, but since you are all in the same space, your manager will be interacting with you daily and maybe even multiple times a day. So if you do have a bad manager or someone that's micromanaging you or watching everything that you're doing, that can be a problem too. But that one again is very highly management specific. It's just that if you're concerned about something like that, you will be seeing your manager likely more often. And then lastly, for the culture component of a small company, it can vary greatly from small company to small company. But since it is so small, that is the culture. Whatever you experience is usually the culture of the company. Whereas, like at a large company, maybe this department has this culture and then another department has a different culture. A small company, everybody's kind of in the same culture. So if you don't like that culture, it's going to be hard to move somewhere else with a different culture unless you leave the company. And if the culture is everybody works like 10-hour days with no overtime pay, then that's kind of like the culture that you're in. And if you leave early or you leave on time, it will probably be noticed if it's against the culture. Same thing with lunch. So even just keeping that in mind can help when trying to decide if a culture is right for you or not. So that's pretty much everything for small companies. Again, this is all in my experience or what I think some things would be like given my experience. So everything's going to be different for each person individually and each company individually. This is just kind of an overview of the experiences that I have had. And regarding pay at a small company, this one can also vary greatly from company to company. In my experience, I've seen that oftentimes they don't pay as well, but again, that is very company specific. And there's obviously companies that would pay great and companies that wouldn't pay as well. So I would just recommend knowing what your position goes for on the general market and just having that knowledge about what the average pay for your position is. Another thing I've noticed is the retirement contributions might not be as good at smaller companies. Again, very general and just something to look at and something that I've noticed. Definitely not the rule, just kind of something that I've seen based on talking to people and my own experiences. So just keep that in mind when you're looking into this portion. But I do recommend always knowing what your position is generally being paid in your area so you kind of know and can compare and make sure that you're being paid fairly for the work that you're doing. Okay, next I want to talk about large companies and what it's like to work at a large company. I want to go through my experience and what are the pros and cons that I've experienced so far. So, the first pro that I've noticed is just the amount of opportunity there is. There's just so many people and such a huge opportunity to network and meet new people. Every day you will probably see new people if you go to a different area, especially. There's going to be a whole different group of people there. So, always somebody new to talk to and to network with. So, the opportunity is pretty huge there. It is nice that there is just so many people that you can rely on and work with. Whereas at a small company, maybe only one person knows how to do something. Whereas a large company, I find that it's easier to get information from multiple different people. So I know that if I can't get an answer today from one person, then I can go to the next person. There's always somebody who will know or a backup person that will know the answer to what you need. So just having that support and community really helps, I think, when you're trying to make progress and get a job done. And then also in my experience of working at a large company, I find that there's a lot more structure and specific processes to get whatever you need or submit whatever you want. And it's usually pretty well documented and they have a system for filing this information that you can easily reference. So I really like how it's very structured and you can kind of go to a place to learn about whatever you need. And they have good resources for that. I've also found that at bigger companies, they have that financial leverage to push to get the best of the best, whether that's people or technology. They're always pushing for innovation and trying to make things better and better for the people that work there, which I really appreciate. And I do find that there's still a culture at a big company. Like I was saying earlier, for small companies, they have that one culture in the company, whereas small companies, they'll have different cultures in different departments, I find, but then the big culture always is still there and people generally know about it and are working towards that culture. So it's not like you're in little silos. Everyone is still working together to a common goal. And again, that's my experience at the large company that I've worked at. Another pro is that there are just so many people at a large company that it would be impossible to know what everybody is doing every day. You're just kind of trusted to do your work, you get what you need to do done. You won't necessarily know what your coworkers are doing on a day to day basis, but you don't really need to. You can just focus on yourself and what you're doing. And if you need help from them, you can kind of work around their schedules too. So just a lot of flexibility there. I also find that larger companies are more up and coming, like they kind of know what the trends are and they're trying to follow that. When that comes to like working from home, they can understand the culture there and try to adjust the strategy of the company to follow what the people want. So they kind of know what's out there and are kind of even leaders in the market there because they're such large companies. Okay, let's go over some cons of being at a large company. Now, the first one is it can sometimes feel like you're just a number because there are just so many people there. So you do kind of have to work to not feel like that sometimes. I know some people struggle with that. So I just wanted to bring that up. Personally, I don't feel that way, but I know a lot of people do sometimes. So I think that's an important thing to know. At a larger company, they'll also have pretty strict policies that you can't necessarily negotiate on. Like, you can always negotiate on these things, but it might be less flexible, like such as vacation time or pay. Like, you can, of course, negotiate on these things, but sometimes they might have strict cutoffs for these categories. Another thing they might not be flexible on is how you can work remotely. Like, say you wanted to work 100% remotely and they just don't offer that, or that's not in their policy, then you might not be able to negotiate that if you don't have like the right leverage. There could also be just stricter rules. Okay, and then regarding pay and retirement contributions at a larger company, I find in my experience it's been a lot more fair or better financially to work for a larger company. I just find like they have more funds that they can allocate to that, and they're more aware of like what's on the market right now and can kind of tailor their jobs to meet that like those requirements and attract the best talent. So just because they have that financial backing, I find that they're able to offer better compensation packages. And again, that's just been in my experience. It's different for everyone. So don't let that change your mind or take that as the rule for anything. The larger companies are usually just more aware of what is a good package, and I think try to work to incentivize people to come to their companies. So they will use pretty aggressive and attractive compensation packages. Lastly, let's talk about medium sized companies. So, medium companies can kind of fall in between both of these, I think. I've worked for two companies I would consider medium sized. One of them I found acted more like a small company, and the other kind of acted more like a large company. So, I think with medium companies, it can go either way. I think some of the aspects are very similar to both of them. Something in common that I found at both medium sized companies was they did have the same kind of strong culture like a small company would, where everyone kind of just followed that culture for the most part. Like, there were some outliers, but the majority would follow that culture. With a medium sized company, they do have those opportunities that you can transfer to, especially laterally. I think it's pretty easy at a medium sized company. And that's the same as a large company. Like, it's usually easy to move laterally to different areas. Where I do think it's a challenge at medium sized companies is just like small companies, there's usually like one person in charge of an area and they've been there for a long time. And it can be hard to get those positions unless that person leaves. I think at all three companies that the amount of time that you've worked at the company matters to them when considering promotions. I think it does matter a lot more the smaller the company. Like, from what I've seen, if there is a promotion available, they're way more likely to give it to somebody that's been there for 20 years than somebody who's been there for like 2 years. Even if the person that's been there 2 years could do the job better, I think they're still going to give it to the person that's been there for 20 years. So I think that kind of bias exists a lot more at smaller companies. I do think it's there still at larger companies, of course, but just in my experience, I've seen that a lot more in smaller companies or medium companies. Whereas at larger companies, it does seem like it matters how long the person has been there, but it also really matters how well they perform at their job. Again, that is just my experience, and your experience could be completely different. So just keep that in mind. So it is pretty hard for me to give a breakdown of a medium company because in my experience, I've seen it lean kind of both ways. So I'd say a medium company is kind of a good compromise if you want like kind of a mixture of small and large. So I think the only way to really know what the culture is going to be like or what it would be like at that medium sized company is to go and be there and see what it is for yourself. So now that we've gone through the three different types of companies, I kind of wanted to share my opinion on them and which one I prefer the most. Now, considering everything and all my different experiences, I can definitely say that I prefer larger companies. I just think that it is a lot better for my personality and what I look for in a company. I really like that you can talk to so many people and that there's so many different groups and lots to learn. I also really like the professionalism of a large company. At least in my experience, I found it a lot more professional and I do enjoy that. I enjoy also like being able to dress up a bit more and all the different options that you have. I also really like having some sort of structure, and I find that a lot more present with large companies. Currently, I'm working at a large company and I really like it. I still haven't been there for that long of a period, so maybe this will change. But right now, I do really enjoy it, and I think it's been my favorite so far for sure. There are some things I miss from a smaller company, like having real plants around and somebody to water them and having more of like a homey environment. I do miss that a bit, but I also really enjoy my new work environment and being at a large company. Again, there's always pros and cons of everything, but for me, I definitely like being at a large company more. And if you're interested in trying that or trying any of these different companies, then I would encourage you to do so. Everything we went through in this video has been my experience and only my opinion. So to know for sure or what your point of view would be on it, you'd have to experience that yourself. So thanks for watching. I hope this was insightful, or if you have a similar experience, let me know. So thanks for watching. See you next time.